back at the National Sexual Assault Conference again, and right now I am with Luz Marquez Benbow, who has done a bunch of incredible work, and I feel like I want you to tell me the story of the work because I don't want to summarize you wrong.
And you think I'm gonna be better, but okay.
Well, I'm like, I know you mentioned briefly before we were retired and got roped back in. So I'm curious as to sort of where you entered back into the work of being in this fight.
Yeah, that's a long but I entered it when I was 26, and I live in upstate New York. I live in Albany. I grew up in Harlem, but I live in Albany, New York, and I heard about the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? I should also tell you and disclose that I am a survivor. I'm an adult survivor of child sexual abuse, but at 26, I had no language for what I was surviving. I knew exactly what I was holding, but I had no language for it. And I don't mean that because I speak Spanish, and I wouldn't have been able to speak Spanish either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And so that was how I entered into this work, was doing it at a state coalition. And at the time, we were a leader nationally. And so we, NISCASA really helped to spear off, because in them days, 1998, I believe it was, there were 23 sexual assault coalitions across the state, which meant that we didn't really have constituency, right? So how do we get off of these states to really uplift, statewide organizations who could provide assistance support to rape crisis centers? And so, CASA and and PCAR and the Iowa to really figure out how do we cut the country and provide technical assistance. And so that really began my work and my journey, both as a woman of color who did this work and as a survivor. And I loved it. It was exciting. It was hard, but it was exciting. I did a lot of technical assistance to my home, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and Guam, America Samoa, Mariana. They all have statewide coalitions. And what this means is that you have advocates on the ground ready to represent. So that's important, right? And it allowed them each to do it in their language. And then, 2003, I left to create the first anti-sexual assault women of color organization called CSA, the National Organization of Sisters of Color and Sexual Assault, and they're here. They still exist. And it was within that work that I fell in love with policy. I'd already been doing policy at NISCASA, the New York State Coalition, but I really put it to practice. And so I like to talk about my work in relationship to how I grew up. I'm a Harlem girl, grew up in the streets of Harlem, went to high school in Brooklyn. Because of my own surviving, I dropped out of college, so I don't have a degree, but I hustled all types of shit. I could hustle how to survive in Harlem, hustle how to get my drugs. So then I also learned how to hustle in a good way. And so I was able to work with some dynamic sisters, national organizations, like the IDVAC, the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, the National Asian Pacific Islander Against Violence organizations, Black Women's Blueprint, and we were able to, for the first time ever in the history of the Violence Against Women Act, really talk about the women as it pertains to sexual violence. And so that led to literally the formation of funding within VAWA, known as the Culturally Specific Program, and I had a huge piece of creating that.
Yeah.
And so what do you do after you do something like that? What do you do after you go to the office of the first Black president who's signing some legislation that you had a piece of? And so I was like, my time is up. I'm up. So after 10 years,
you're like, I dropped the bike and I retired.
I was like, I found justice. I was like, that was my justice. No, I don't want my brother who harms me in prison. No, I don't want, I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe that that's what's going to end rape and sexual assault, especially as it gets complicated around access and child sexual abuse. But that was my justice. I got it. I'm done. you know, and so I decided, and that took 10 years of a fight. I was already in it in 8 years at the coalition. And so I'm like, yo, it's 18 years. It's time for me to go home. I live in upstate New York. It's quiet as heck. I got 3 beautiful kids and a great husband that loves me. And so I left. And it was time. It was time.
Yeah.
You know, I think some of us stay in this movement till we die. And I'm like, there's so many young who are like ready and primed to take it to the next level. And if we just move out of the way. So I left. And so in 2016, I left. I went back to school because I was like, I owe it to myself to go back to school. I was like, I want to be a forensic nurse examiner because I was like, they ain't got no Bible forensic nurse examiners. I have a lot of expertise of working with people with disabilities. So I could be like, so I could like really look. We do this in a way, you know, that really doesn't harm people who have disabilities and collect evidence. I could learn how to do it in the trans community. You know, like I saw, I was like, why the heck am I going to school? These people have no context for what the real world looks like and what our communities really need. And so the healthcare system needs a lot of work around what does it mean to really provide support after a rape and sexual assault. But what does that really mean? That really takes on. So in 2016, I got invited for a job in New York City. It's a platform that's focused on child sexual abuse and leadership of survivors of color. There's 18 of us. I'm one of the 8 fellows. Folks like Aisha Shahida, Ignacio Rivera was down with our group, and then Me Too spent off. And so, but Girls for Gender Equity, which was the agency that she works for at that time, is part of the group. So it's a really group of amazing people working to end child sexual abuse.
Awesome. And when you talk about survivor leadership, I mean, you're how powerful and important survivor leadership is, right? And I think it is that, like, how do we make that we not only center survivors, but that we're letting them control not only the narrative, but the direction of the movement?
Absolutely. Wow. You know, I think we're in our heads too much sometimes. Like when I hear you say that, I know that people are probably thinking, well, what the heck does that mean? And how do we do that to make sure that we're taking care of the survivor? And it's like, stop it. Like, stop it. The first thing to do is stop thinking that you have to take care of us, right? So, like, we've done a dynamic job of taking care of ourselves all these years. The things that we might have chosen might not have been the best things, right? And so I can tell you when I was a teenager, I made horrible choices. I was a high school truant, I did drugs, I did all types of things to hurt myself, right? But that's part of my journey. And to take those things away without having something to replace it would have totally gotten me to probably commit suicide or something else. And so I think the first thing to do is to trust the survivor, that they know what is in their best interest, right? And to give them the mic. To give us the mic. And so it doesn't mean that we don't have our own personal work to do and our own personal healing, right? So I sit here with you and it looks like it's really easy, but I got like 20 years of like hard ass therapy with my therapist. You understand? That I have every Friday at 8:30 in the morning, so I will see her. And so I do my own work. And so I think if you're a survivor and you want and are interested in doing this work and being a leader, you've got to do your own personal work. And whatever that looks like, whether it's yoga, acupuncture, direct talk, you know, straight counseling or support group, whatever that looks like to you, don't think that you're not immune from continuing to do that, because it's a journey, especially for those of us who've been abused as children. It is a constant journey of, you know, it's not a line we talk about, right? Like surviving is not a line, it's not linear, it's a circle. And so at any moment, things happen in your life, people die, people come in, and things happen, and people get triggered. And the trigger is an opportunity to grow, right? It's an opportunity to grow. Mm-hmm. And so what I think the movement has to do, and by the way, I will say this also about the movement, there are many of us who are survivors in this movement. But because of the stigma that we within our own movement have of what it means to be a survivor, we are not allowed to be our survivors. And so for a long time, I was a quiet survivor trying to handle the work and being fearful that I'd be pathologized, you know, because I had a bad day. Do you understand? So,
yeah.
So it's like, okay, if we want the world to stop stigmatizing and shaming survivors, then we have to do that in our own movements as well. Yeah. And so part of it is is get off the mic, turn the mic, candid to someone, create the space. All of these coalitions are doing amazing work. Well, each of them should have a survivor board or a coalition that really helps them to move their work, right?
Yeah.
But I think we think that we need psychologists and we need therapists in the room. No. Many of us have that. Not all of us, because there are some people that don't have those services. And so that's a constant push for what does that look like? Many of the communities that don't have those services look like me, right? Like they look Black, Latinx, Asian, Caribbean, Native American. And so we need to include services that are culturally specific so that we're healing and we're allowing people to grow and change. And so, but I think a big piece of it is having this movement go from taking care of people to working with people.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm struck too by the way in which, in some ways, survivor leadership also means allowing survivors to tell these real, authentic stories that don't sound like the prescribed narrative or the respectful survivor narrative that people are so used to that makes people comfortable.
Absolutely.
And what do you see as sort of the impact largely, like sort of more broadly on the movement to end violence of fostering that kind of leadership? Like what have you seen that it changes in like the approach and the direction of the movement when survivors really do have the mic and are the people who are able to say like, no, that's not
right.
That's not real. That's not helpful.
Right. I mean, well, think about it, right? So I think, thinking about like Me Too in Toronto. Toronto herself is a survivor. Imagine if the movement back when she was in the 90s in Alabama had just listened when she came to the Rape Crisis Center to get help for the girls that she was working with. We would have Me Too a long time ago. We did, right? Which we did, but it didn't hit the platform in the way that it did. Right?
Yeah.
Think about the work of Aisha Shahida Simmons, who created the first documentary of Black women and the rape of Black women in the early 2000s. Like, think about how that work brings into community places that you can't go to if you're the prevention educator, and you know what I'm saying? And you got the CDC model that is like a best practice model that has they're not going to listen to that, And so I think what happens with survivorship, and I have to give a lot of kudos to the Just Beginnings Collaborative, and a lot of those that are in my fellowship for a long time, part of thinking of what Just Beginnings Collaborative is now. And it was their leadership and their voice was like, no, we know how to do this. We may not have the answers for everything, but we know how to have hard and critical conversations that are needed. And then the last thing that I will say is that these last 4 years of this fellowship have been amazing because as the survivor who goes around and tells her story within her own Afro-Latina community, what it allows is it allows a permission so that other people are able to tell their stories. So I had a session yesterday, it was about 24 of us, it was focused on Afro-Latinas. We didn't have a high Afro-Latinas, but the Latinas and the people that came, I had it's because I'm leading this session. Half people came in the room because they were like, y'all are doing this work, you are survivors, and you're also leading this work. And I think it presents opportunity to those young people like I was at one point, who was committing all self-hate stuff because I couldn't see in this work or in any way. And so when you see a survivor who's up there and they're sharing their shit to see what's possible, right? By healing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? How do you get to probably actually we want to end this, but in the meantime there are people who are experiencing it. So how do we help shape what that narrative looks like so that you don't feel dirty for the rest of your life? So you don't feel suicidal. You don't feel like you're guilty of doing something that was beyond your control.
Totally. Well, and I want to talk to you about the fight for this funding in Bawa and what that was like.
Yeah.
What that was like for you, and sort of, I mean, I think, because the theme of the conference is beyond the breakthrough, right?
Right.
Like moving beyond Me Too. But part of that is learning how to leverage this sort of groundswell that we have and turn it into something tangible. And so you had this 10-year fight for this funding, and it's also the question in my mind is like, why didn't this funding exist already, right? And it's because probably there's no one at the table who ever would have thought to say that there was some funding missing from this
so
legislation.
complicated.
Right?
And I want to say this disclaimer before I answer your question. The most social justice movements suffer from racism, right? And so social movements come from pain and they come from struggle, and they have a beauty to them in the way that they shift and the way that they move, right? You go 2 steps, you fall back 2 steps, right? Like it's a movement, right? Like you're constantly growing and trying to massage the message and what you're doing. And I think for a long time, the violence against women, the gender-based violence movement has done amazing strides for women, children, and men. But it was clear that our voices, that our lives were not part of that narrative. And when I say ours, our Native American sisters, our Latina sisters, our Black sisters, our API sisters, that narrative was not added to it. It was sort of an afterthought. And if you had talked to any all those years, they'd be like, oh no, the Violence Against Women Act speaks to all people. It's a federal legislation that can't discriminate, right? It speaks to all people, and it does, right? If you're in the right place, right? If you have if you are the specific sexual expression, right? But if you're not, and you live at the margins of the Black person, it needs to be a trans Black person, it needs to be a Black trans disabled person, right? And so if you can create something that speaks to marginalized people, everybody has access to it. And at that time, everybody didn't have access to it. And so this was really about creating access and creating alternatives. I am a survivor who never wanted to utilize the criminal justice system, but that's what works for me. It may not work for all people. So I just wanted to create access, and I didn't do this alone. There was a cadre of Black, Latinx, Asian, and Native American communities all trying to figure out how to do this without the intersections of a gay person, a disabled person, a deaf person at that intersection of race as well. And so it was hard. Really hard within the movement itself. I'm not an attorney. I didn't graduate from college. So I used to walk with Bawa in my book bag. Like literally. I used to read it. I used to have tags on it and have highlights because I needed to do so we always got to be like 10 steps ahead, right? Because it's not set up for us. And so I'm just like working my butt off. My colleague at the time was Condensed. We were the only 2 at that time who were really focused on sexual violence, and then all of the other that president were focused on domestic violence. One title. I had the housing title, disability title, Condensed was around campus and health, and so she took those titles, and then we began to literally craft what is now the whole Dab, Williams, Tanya Lovelace, Carmen Rios, and we were all committed to like how do we use our leadership to really make space to bring in the rest of our communities into health. Towards the Congressional Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Asia Pacific. This is amazing. And no. So it was hard. I think my strategy worked. Right? It's like who's gonna argue? I mean, you know what we see now this 45%. But back in them days, who's gonna argue, right? We're protecting women and children. But many of them didn't know that, and I think my experience speaks to it. It's like the 70s, 1980. I lived in the richest, most culturally diverse city, right? New York City in Harlem, and no one spoke to my mom about sexual violence, child sexuality. No one spoke to me about it. I spoke English or Spanish, and I could find a and that didn't make sense to me. you could be in Harlem and eat collard greens and platanos, and yet I could two cuisines, right, from two different communities, and yet I couldn't find a place to talk about what happened to me. And so I was like, if that's what it's like in Harlem, then what is it like in Detroit? What's it like in Chicago? What's it like in Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa? And so we got problems. And so that's why when I watched Obama do what he did and sign and stand, it was just an honor to be like, this is what justice looks like.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so moved by that idea of, this is what justice looks like. Because I think a lot of times there's sort of this battle, right? Do we fix the culture or do we fix the laws? And I think a lot of times it's both, right? And what have been sort of the impacts of that amazing, incredible?
Oh my God, it's been amazing. So, and I remember after I left listening to there was a show, I don't know if it was on NPR or Democracy Now, and it was during sexual violence April, and I love talk radio, and I remember driving upstate New York, some rural area around Albany or Troy, and they were interviewing the National Sexual Violence Resource Center and a couple of colleagues that I know, and they were talking about all of the wins in the Violence Against Women Act, and they were like, yes, and we have a culturally specific grant program. This way, I just started to cry because I was like, that's amazing. But I think what the product is, we have Black Women's Blueprint in Brooklyn, who's doing amazing work. We've got groups like the National API Sexual Violence Organization. We've got groups like in small communities like Mujeres en Acción in Chicago, Dawa Farm for Haitian women in New York City. Oh my God, Monsoon in Iowa that works with the Pacific community, Amani Services in Waterloo, Iowa that works with the Black community. So what it is we've got all of these culturally specific led by and for communities of color work doing amazing work that is hardcore work in their community with respect to their language. And so it's just been amazing. Womankind in New York City that works with Asian women, Saki that works with South Asian women. And so a lot of these groups, some of these groups existed before this funding, but what relief some of them have had to be able to form and be new and get this funding, and then the older ones who've been around to be able to sorry, I didn't mean to start, but to be able to just be like, oh my God, this is added funding. Like, now we can try this program because this is exactly the type of program they're looking for, And so it's been an amazing process to see. And sometimes it's a quiet chuckle in me because I'll be at a meeting and they'll be like, that culturally specific program that we got from Obama, And so it's humbling. It's really humbling.
Yeah, and when we talk about going beyond the breakthrough, like, what do you think still needs? I mean, obviously, one thing that needs to happen is that VAWA can't disappear. But beyond fighting the regression, like, how do we move forward? What policies do you know could still help advance these sort of services and this kind of work in the communities that need it the most?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I think definitely we have to fight the regression, right, of losing any of these protections, especially in Native communities where the majority of the offenders are not from the Native community, they're from outside of the Native community. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. When I think of Puerto Rico after, you and I were just talking as Puerto Rican women after the storm and the mass people are leaving Puerto Rico, right? So what's that going to look like for our community? But what is that also, that impact of what happened in Puerto Rico on women and children and their safety? And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But as I think about my work around child sexual abuse, I often wonder if what we did around child protective services and child welfare was the best and only option. Are there other options that we can provide children and their families? Is our child advocacy centers, and I'm probably going to get in trouble, but I have nothing to lose. I'm 53, and so come with me if you want to. But our child advocacy center is the only answer to respond to child sexual abuse. So what if the child never comes to us? How do we flag high school kids, who we know are showing what is typical of what trauma looks like in young people, right? How do we work with schools? How do we work with all health, education, housing in order to really get access to children who are crying for help because someone has harmed them? How do we get to families to help them figure out how to help restore the harm that was done, right? Asian communities talk about restore the harmony that was taken away. Like, so how do we do that? How do we do that when we know not only is VAWA being regressed, but there's a mass incarceration of Black and Latino people, not just men anymore, but women, right? How do we deal with Black trans women who are being killed, not just in the U.S., but globally, And so I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and I think you're right. Some of it is legislation, but a lot of it is going to be cultural unpacking and undoing, and having to wrestle with this country's responsibility around slavery and racism. Like, they have to answer to that. Yeah. And how does that all connect to gender-based violence? It completely connects, because the slave trade was not just about enslaving people, but our bodies were raped. Our men were sexually mutilated. Our girls were forced to breed. And so there's a collective history there around gender-based violence that needs to be upheld and moved. But I think given what we have right now, this is a good time for us to continue to build in communities, and to build a strong foundation of what is needed to take the fight to make sure that this country doesn't regress any further anywhere in terms of thinking about children at the border and the lives and what happens to them. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, and this all sort of made me think too about the idea of fostering leadership, survivor leadership in the movement, and you mentioning earlier that you just didn't have the vocabulary because we as a culture don't give folks the vocabulary to talk about this kind of stuff, and especially I think with child sex abuse in particular, right? And so often it is something that people might not even consciously recall. People might not be able to put words to it for so long, and that stops them from being leaders in the movement too, right? And so how do we sort of expand, because I do think in Me Too, I've heard from a lot of survivors on the Ms. side who have written with us, who have said, like, what about me? I'm a survivor of incest. I'm a survivor of child sex abuse. Or, there are incarcerated women. Like, what about the women we're not talking about when we talk about how we're talking about sexual violence?
Right. And within the workplace, and then it only stays there.
Exactly. And so how do you think we expand this conversation to include people in the intersections, yes, of all races, and then also people who have these sort of experiences that still get pushed aside because they're not as comfortable or easy for us to break down and confront as, this mythical narrative of sexual violence that even advocates can fall into the cycle of, like, recycling.
Oh, and we definitely, and advocates, and I'll say we, because as much as I'm a survivor, I'm also an advocate, and we've always fallen into that cycle of, that's a hard story to hear, or, but I think there's a lot to be said about following the voices of Black women. I think there's a lot to be said of following the voices of Black trans women, of Black women who have disabilities, of folks who have not been allowed to be at the center of I think there's a lot to be said about making space for that, resourcing time and space for that, right? So whether you're a philanthropist and you're listening to this, whether you are a governmental entity and you're listening to this, if you really truly want to end sexual violence, then you have got to start from the most marginalized survivors, and allow time and space for that to generate. And then once you do that, then all women, all children, and all people get access to that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I don't want to leave here without saying that the movement has been the movement. And then there's, when I think of Tarana's work and I hear her talk about how she was in the movement, and there's so many different levels to what this movement is, right? And so what she offers us isn't something that is just hers. She's offering us something that we all get to say, yo, me Afro-Latinas, we need to, yo también, you know what I'm saying? And so, but we have to make sure that people have the space and feel a connection to do that. And so that it's not just about workplace violence. And I don't want to downplay, because violence is violence, right? And harm is harm. Yeah. And so it's real. Whether it's happening for 5 minutes in the workplace or it happens over years, in your own home by your own brother. And, violence is violence. And I don't get to judge, the amount of harm that was done. Like, this isn't like something to argue about who was harmed the worst. But what it really is to really spin how does race and violence and class and gender and ability play a role, right? In allowing others to be more vulnerable than others.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank
for
you.
For taking the time and for your leadership and for all you're doing to make space for new voices and to lift up the voices that people need to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. This is great. You're so easy to talk to.